I do have a wild story.
Okay.
Of a drummer who didn't show up at church one time.
Ooh, that's good.
Because he was in prison.
Oh, gosh. Welcome to The Gathering Greenhouse, a podcast to help us grow together. I'm Steve.
I'm John.
And we are ready to go this morning.
Woohoo.
Are you rested?
No.
No.
I'm very...
Are you ever rested?
Generally, no. But today I am...
Generally, no. Even worse?
Even worse off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully... Next week you're feeling a little bit better.
That's the plan. That's
the plan. Okay.
Well, because
how are you planning for? Like you're planning to go to sleep early, or
this is where things are just working out great for me. Is this Sunday upcoming we have Declare Centerville.
Yeah.
So
that's what we're calling it.
Declare Centerville.
Okay. Is that like
that's the name?
That's the name of the event.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's one service.
Should I know this?
You probably should. We
okay.
Probably all know it. But I'll just tell you and everybody else at the same time.
Okay.
So Centerville High School, 10 a.m. at the football field.
10 a.m. Very important because we don't have a 10 a.m. service.
We don't have a 10 a.m. If you show up at 11 a.m., it might be done.
Yeah.
If you show up at 9:30, you're going to be sitting there for a while. 8:15, you're probably going to get drafted to help. So
yeah. Well, I don't know how. Is there a lot to do to set it? Like, see, here's the thing. I'm just going to be honest with everyone who's watching. Is that I have not been involved at all, and I know that's been on purpose.
Yeah.
But people have come to me and asked me a lot of questions, and I'm like, talk to Ron. I don't really know. Like,
what's really cool about the event is it's a lot of different churches coming together to do this.
So that's the number one question that I've gotten is, what are the churches?
I don't have the full list.
Yeah.
But
I actually saw it posted on there.
We have
as you talk, I'm going to pull it up.
We have invited pretty much every church in Centerville, and then a lot of churches that are like on the Centerville border with maybe another town. So that we could all come together and do this. Some churches might just be showing up and participating. Some have been involved in the putting together of the event. But
it's Declare Centerville?
Declare Centerville.
Okay. It's just so funny that they would pick Centerville because I guess that's where it's going to be.
Yep.
But, it's really, we represent a lot more than just Centerville.
Our church is a weird, it's being like where we are is kind of weird because we're actually in Washington Township.
Well, I love how this too. Like if you go on the Declare Centerville, it says host is Centerville Grace.
So there's actually a bunch of churches have events too. So
they're hosting.
A bunch of churches are hosting their own event, but it's all the same event.
It's confusing.
If you're confused, let me clarify for you. Okay, we're just gonna say this right now. One service, Centerville High School at the football stadium, 10 a.m. Come. It's a church service. It's family friendly. Everyone should be there. There are going to be a lot of people from our church, a lot of people from other churches. But the big thing to just take away from this, if you show up here on Sunday, here at the gathering this Sunday, you will be stranded in the parking lot.
Yes.
And there will be no donuts. And you will be sad.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was going to be easy for me to find this. Like you said, there are several events on there, and I clicked on the one that's actually hosted by one of the churches.
We can make this really easy for you, though. If you just go to our church center, you can find all the information there.
All the information there.
And it's good information.
Essentially, just show up at 10 a.m. at Centerville High School.
That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, the cool thing about it being multi-churches is, many hands make light the work. And so there's been a lot of planning and there's a lot of teams that are involved. So it's not like when we do Chili Bowl where it's like all hands on deck or something like that. For a lot of our teams who are used to having to do stuff, you actually can just show up.
You can just
have a nice relaxing Sunday.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm planning to do, have a nice relaxing Sunday. So... and that's why I'm saying I hope I'm rested by next week. Okay,
let's hope so. Okay, so I have a fun question to start us off with here.
Let's go
this morning.
Partay.
Yep. So we all have a lot of volunteers that show up on Sunday that make things happen, right? We have a lot of great volunteers, but occasionally we will get people who can't show up, and there's all different kinds of reasons.
Some super valid reasons.
Oh, often, I always get valid reason, right? But there are the occasional where you get a really strange, I can't show up to church because of this, and you're just like, that is the strangest reason
or
I've
you
ever
want
heard.
to ask and pry a little bit, but you're afraid to because you're like, I don't know what else they're going to say. You know? Yeah.
Yep. So my question is, what's the weirdest excuse or reason? Excuse kind of sounds like, you should have been there, but you're trying to get out of it. But so what's the weirdest reason you've ever heard of someone not showing up to church or to volunteer or something like that?
Yeah, that's tough. The one that popped in my mind first was back when I was in Missouri, the church I grew up in. We had a drummer who just no-showed.
Well, first off, drummers are usually...
Drummers tend to be quite the unsavory I'm just kidding. I'm saying this for Matt's benefit. He's a very good drummer, but...
they also are very quirky, right?
Yes, and...
Drummers are known to be quirky and flaky, Matt? Are they known to be flaky?
I actually... A lot of the
they're
time...
the least... Let's see, I would feel like maybe the, guitar players
So this is where...
might be more flaky.
At our church...
Vocalists?
At our church, I say...
We're just calling them all out.
Drummers usually have to do so much setup, and guitar players are similar to this too. Like, they tend to... They have to get there early, so they don't tend to be super flaky. I find that the more setup you have to do, the more I'm banking you're going to be early. Yeah. But this guy, he didn't show up, and we're sitting there. So, fortunately, the worship pastor, he also was a drummer, so he hopped on the kit, and he was like, I was just playing bass, and he's like, John, you're singing today, and it was a wild thing, but later that day, we're texting him, we're calling him. Nobody has heard from this guy.
Yeah.
And then we see his mugshot on the news.
Oh gosh.
So he had gotten arrested.
On the news, on the local news.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I will not say what he was being accused of.
Was he ever allowed to drum at the church ever again?
So he was still in jail when I moved away. So I don't.
You don't know.
I don't know if he's ever gotten back in church. But what was really crazy is he was our only drummer.
Yeah.
And after that happened, we kind of had to go on this mad dash to try to find a new church drummer. And we found two people, and they were just awesome. I think they both still play at that church. So
that's a pretty good one. I don't know if I have one that can top it, but it's maybe somewhat along those lines. Not for that person, for someone else that they were around. The person was actually fine, but I got a text one morning, 7 a.m. Hey, I'm not going to be able to make it to church today because I'm being evacuated from my house. My neighbor is threatening that he has a bomb and is going to blow up his house. And he sent me a picture.
So why did? Never mind. I was gonna say, why did your neighbor call you instead of just walking over?
I don't know if the police knocked on their door. Was it him? No. It was. But then he sends me a picture, and it's of almost like an armored tank with someone there's best thing I say is a manhole on the top of this thing. Like a tank where you it's literally like that. And there's someone with a gun out of that thing, and he's pulling up to the driveway next to him. He sends me a picture out of his window.
Man.
And then I'm like, okay, that's a good you should don't worry about coming and volunteering at church today. You should take care of yourself.
That's wild. I've never had anything like that. That's a different level of intensity. Could you imagine waking up on Sunday? You're like, I'm waking up. I'm going to go to church. It's going to be a good day. SWAT's here.
Yeah. No, we had, it wasn't on a Saturday or Sunday, but we had a fire on our street one night for not a good reason. Someone who was a ex-boyfriend went and burnt someone's house down.
Actual arson.
Arson.
My goodness. Yeah.
And it was.
What is a good reason for a fire, Steve?
You leave the stove on, or that's what I'm saying.
Things that just happen.
Things that just happen. Yeah. Electrical fire, whatever. Maybe your house gets struck by lightning. There's a lot of different reasons why. But when it's someone who was going out of their way to be mean.
I remember one Sunday. I am on my way to the church, and I get a call from the worship pastor, and he's like, "Hey, we're going to still try to have service, but don't come in the normal door you come in." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "The church is flooded." And we were in an old movie theater. So the stage was here where
was the movie theater still rent? It had
No. It was
movie theater now is a church?
It was an old movie theater that was converted into a rec center.
Okay.
So they left one of the theaters as like a stage and like auditorium, and then the other 2 theaters, it wasn't a big theater, were converted into racquetball courts.
Okay. So the acoustics had to be terrible in a racquetball court.
Oh, horrible. Yeah. So, here's where it's wild. The floor, was super sloped because it's a movie theater. The stage was at the bottom, and it was built up, about 2 or 3 feet. And from the front of the stage, halfway
you
up,
had chairs? Were the chairs kind of sloped down?
We were still in the theater chairs.
Oh, okay.
And so it was like
I'm just picturing
tiered,
people sitting in like folding chairs where it's like pointing down.
It looked like a movie theater, except instead of a big screen, we had a stage.
Okay.
And then, but like halfway up the room was just sitting water. And I guess the sub pump was underneath the.
So it had flooded all the way up there. So a lot of water. Wow.
Yeah. So what was cool about this is everything on stage was fine. Everything else was run through the ceiling.
Yeah.
It was just the stuff that had come out from the basically the ground right there. Yeah. So we were able to get enough of the water up that there was just like.
How'd you do? Like you turned the sump pump back on or something?
Yeah, and they were able to get enough out that we could have people sit. And it was concrete flooring too, so like. There was no.
Was it still pretty
carpet.
damp in there? You had water.
We had standing water still in there. It was, and we still had service. But the band, to get on stage, we had to walk around the building outside and come in through there was like a back door, so you could do like load in, load out, and then we had to leave and go around to the lobby, and it was wild, a wild Sunday. There's a picture of it. I might try to put it in here.
Well, do you remember the one Sunday where we had David was out of town and we had a guest speaker in, and he sent us over. He's like, I went to downtown Dayton.
Okay, that's actually the wildest reason someone showed up.
We're kind of like, huh? Like, how did that? Like, did you just assume that the church was located in downtown Dayton?
He was like,
it's the Gathering Dayton.
He showed up 5 minutes before service.
Yeah,
and said he went to the wrong church in downtown Dayton,
but never really told us which church was the wrong church. Because I had so many questions there, but there was not enough time, and it was not going to be worth it. Of like, what? How did this happen?
This is the sad part of all that is like if he had showed up and preached a killer sermon, it wouldn't have been a big deal. The stuff like that happens. But it is to this date the only sermon that I have pulled off the internet. Like it was just a wild day.
It was a wild ride for all of us.
It was a wild ride. Yeah. And that's why David isn't allowed to go on vacation anymore. Oh, wait. He just went on vacation?
He just did, yeah. No, you always got to have a few of those. Then we appreciate David even more.
Right.
Right. We're like, you know what? Yeah, he's actually pretty good. We'll keep him.
Yeah. That's what all the connection cards said this week. It's like, bring David back.
Actually, I didn't show them to you. There was a lot of comments about
Thanks,
great
Mom.
sermon, great music too. So I don't know what that says about you because you weren't involved in the music. But there was great music and great sermon.
Yeah, so, I'm good with if other people want to do it.
So are they saying are your gifts more aligned with the sermon side? I don't know. I mean, that's just to be
TBD.
Yep.
So yeah.
Well, speaking of sermon. I have some follow-up questions here. This
is great.
Okay.
What's fun about this is like often you and David like communicate about like questions what you want to talk about from the sermon beforehand. This is completely off the cuff for me. So
completely off the cuff.
Don't hold me to anything.
Okay, we will Holman you to it.
Hold me.
All right. What part of the sermon resonated with you the most? Like, what were you? What were you like when you were writing it? What were you? I mean, I know you talked about the things that you were passionate about. That you talked about, and you could tell you got a little bit excited there. But it seemed, honestly, I'm gonna say you seemed passionate about the whole sermon. Well, like every part of it. I don't know if there was one part where
Jeremy and I were just talking about this because he saw me in 2 different services, and he's like, "Hey, for third service, he's like, this isn't really a critique. He's just like, you seemed like
you're amped,
extra amped." And he's like, "But I didn't notice it in the other one." And I was like, "Well, I did drink an energy drink right before third service." I was struggling. I woke up at like 2:30 yesterday.
Yeah.
And
were you making eye contact with one person in particular and like waving your hand?
I don't know.
Okay.
That would have been really fun. The Office, Dwight doing the Mussolini speech.
Yes.
But I was like, I through third service felt a little more like just excited, and I was like, it's really funny that he noticed that, you know.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I just had a lot of caffeine right before I hopped on stage, and that was probably not something I should have done. But
yeah. Well, I feel like some of that stuff also comes with reps,
Yeah.
you know, like, and it's hard when you get a here and there kind of thing. Is it, you know, you can navigate some of that stuff better
Right.
because you're used to different things coming at
Right.
you, you know?
Right.
You can only prepare for so much.
Well, what was really funny is in third service, somebody said amen.
Yeah.
And that was my first time preaching that I've like heard someone that loud say
Was
that.
it someone new to the church?
I don't know. I don't know who said it. I
Because
didn't notice
occasionally
it.
I will hear like amens, and like which I don't get to be in church a ton now, but I used to more. And someone I saw was like amen, and I look back and saw I'm like that person.
They're
And I
new.
really didn't see them much after that.
So I've
they wanted to go to an amen
I think
type
this
of
is
church.
my fifth time preaching, fourth or fifth, and you know it. I'm still like figuring it out. Like I'm still learning a lot about it, and that. So when I heard that, like, it kind of like startled me a little bit, and I remember like thinking like, oh, cool, you know, like somebody's like talking back. That was exciting, but then I lost my train of thought, and I was like, oh wow, just even that little thing like that,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, this is different, and but yeah, no, back to your question, the part that kind of resonated most with me was, probably it was two pieces, but I think just talking about how we do uncomfortable things for people we love and people we care about, you know, and then realizing that's what Jesus did for us, you know, because I do think a lot of us Christians, the reason we don't share the gospel is that it's an uncomfortable thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of reasons for that. I talked about the fear of rejection, you know, but we do things that make us uncomfortable when we care about the people we're doing them for. And I didn't use this in Sunday, but you know, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was like, if you're a parent, you know, for me as a dad, there's a lot of things I do that make me uncomfortable, but I don't even think about the discomfort because I do them for my kids, on behalf of my kids. And, you know,
Picking up, throw up.
Picking up, throw up. you know, doing the yucky
things
chores.
you would not want to do for any other.
Yeah, you wouldn't do it for anybody, right?
Yeah.
Except for people you love. And, you know, I was saying there are a lot of dads and moms and parents out there that just like maybe you work a really hard job that you don't enjoy, but you joyfully do it for the sake of what it provides for your family and how you can care and love for your family. You know,
Very familiar with that. Very, very familiar. Where's the camera right there? Very familiar.
You doing okay, Steve?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was something that, you know, really resonated with me was just, it's not, I didn't want to get up to tell people it's not uncomfortable. You shouldn't feel uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable, but we do uncomfortable things anyway. You just got to do it anyway. And, you know, so that was probably one of the things I was more passionate about. And then, the other was just, when it came to sharing your testimony is just to remember that, like, it is the same work that Christ did to save, you know, what we deem as boring testimonies as it was to save the wildest stories, you know. Sometimes we hear stories and they are very impactful but it's like, you know, maybe it was somebody who was super addicted to drugs or they were in a horrible living situation or they experienced something that was super hard and, you know, and then they found Jesus and everything changed. And you hear those stories and it's really easy to be like, oh, those are awesome. And then you look at yourself and you go, well, I gave my life to Jesus at summer camp. It wasn't really all that dramatic, you know, and you almost diminish your story, but like Christ died just as much for your story as he did for the story of the addict. And, you know, it's not a little thing.
Yes, absolutely. I think honestly, John, that's the same thing that resonated the most with me was that the power of Jesus in our lives, of how that can change people. I think that when you've been a Christian a long time, that the power of Jesus has a tendency to become normal, right? Normalized, where we're like, where we just take it for granted. But when you experience extreme life change, where you feel that power more because it's new to you, that same gift that we received for that life change that takes place is what other people are craving, but they don't know, they don't have access to it because they don't know about it, haven't experienced it. that's the same, those are the kind of things that should motivate us, but we often need reminders of it because there's a lot of people sitting in those seats who have been Christians for a long time.
Yeah.
We need a good mix of people who are on fire because it's new to them to, see that fire in them and to make us excited again too. But also beyond that, right, we're called to do it.
Right.
Like it's a actual commandment for us to do that. It's actually the last thing that Jesus told us to do right before he left is to go and tell other people about me. And life change is part of that. There is so much power in the word of God alone. Take ourselves out of the situation. There's so much power in just the word of God and the truth that comes from that is freeing and empowering and offers life change. And that is what should excite us about it.
And I think there's something you mentioned too, like, the difference between someone who's been a believer for a long time and a younger believer is sometimes what happens in that is, and the reason we kind of forget the power of the transformation that God has done for us is it's almost like this, I don't want maybe call it like a form of atrophy, like, because what happens is if you're a believer, you take it for granted because one of the things that happens is like, so when you give your life to Christ and if he has really changed your life and then all of a sudden you are feeling led to change things about your life. Maybe the people you interact with are having to adjust. Maybe some of the behaviors you were engaging in are changing and it's super noticeable to the people around you because they're like, one day you were like this, now you're acting like this.
Yeah.
But for those of us who have been Christians for a while, and what I've seen happen a lot is, we get plugged into a church.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we wake up one day and we realize that all of our friends are from church.
Yeah.
And
no, you have to work at it.
Yeah. And
it's got to be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well,
because you're around people who aren't like you.
There isn't the difference between Tuesday and Wednesday that there was when before you gave your life to Christ and after. And so we just kind of forget that, we almost become desensitized to the power of that transformation. Yeah. And it's really good and healthy for us to sit down and remember where we were, not to dwell on our past, not to fill ourselves with guilt and shame of what we've done, but to recognize that like we are where we are today because of what Christ did for us then. Yeah. And that same power, that is affecting the person that is in that, in that early stage where it is exciting and things are changing a lot and quickly, that's the same power we're living by today. It just might seem less dramatic because, you aren't struggling with sin the same way you used to. You aren't engaging in the same behaviors. It might seem like you're dealing with less behavioral change and more just heart attitude adjustment, and it's less visible to a lot of people. And so it's just good for us to remember that, you still have that same story. Christ changed you. Yeah. And that's a powerful thing.
Yes. So. All right, next question here, which is, so how can we apply the main message of the sermon this week, like in everyday life?
Yeah.
What are some things you would say? I mean, I know at the end of your sermon, you kind of talked about some of those things.
So I think the big takeaway is just to make sure we are preaching Jesus first.
Yeah.
So
what does that look like?
Yeah. So I think this is something all of us struggle with because all of us, we're not thinking about Jesus all the time, right? Yeah. We're not thinking about advancing the gospel all the time. And it's okay to like sports. It's okay to like movies. It's okay to be a fan of music and artists and be excited about those things and to talk about those things. And that's not the point, is that it should only be Jesus and you can't talk about anything else.
Yeah.
But I think the main point and the main takeaway for us is we all need to examine our lives and I think what a lot of us will find, I mean, the classic preaching to yourself message is what I have found and am finding more and more in my life is that I'm like, yeah, I'm a Christian and everyone knows I'm a Christian, but this area of my life is actually not promoting Jesus. It's promoting something different. Even to the point where sometimes I think we can realize that like my church friends know I'm a Christian, my family knows I'm a Christian, but at work, nobody knows. Right. And then it's like, so there is an area in my life where I am not promoting Jesus first. Now, I'm not saying you need to walk into work, and just start standing on a desk preaching the gospel to everybody.
Probably shouldn't.
Probably shouldn't. They'll think you're crazy. But like, do look for those opportunities in those conversations you have, maybe at lunch with somebody where they're struggling and you say, hey, I actually have the solution. It's Jesus. And, just look for those areas. I think social media is a big area where lots of us will like we post all the time, but do I ever post about Jesus? And like even another level of this is like, what if I'm posting something that actually like in my politics, right? I'm actually posting something that isn't gracious towards the other side, or isn't, doesn't reflect Jesus and how I'm talking about the politics. And then I post right after that, but like, hey, come to church, come learn about Jesus. Hey, let me share the good news of Jesus. I've actually like undermined that message because it's now associated with that other message. And so even to examine the things we post, how it affects our witness, affects our, the mission of sharing the gospel is something to really think about and consider. And it's not to say you shouldn't post things, but just be wise about it and to remember that, like, and ask yourself this, like there's things that I want to post that I think are funny, that I think we'll get some quick laughs. I'm a person, I don't shy away. I have pretty strong feelings about politics, and there are things I want to be like, oh, this would be a really funny thing to say. And I know the people that agree with me will they'll laugh at it. But I also know that the people who follow me online, a lot of them will be offended by that in an unnecessary way. And if I want to convince them of Jesus, it's probably wise for me to not just be offending them for no reason. The gospel is an offensive message enough to tell people that without Christ, you are a sinner destined to spend eternity away from God, is an offensive message. Yeah. So because the gospel is offensive, we don't have to be, right? And honestly, we should do everything we can. And this is where actions come into play. Right? If my actions communicate to people that I love them and I care for them, that I am willing to do uncomfortable things for them, when I say something that is truthful, that is necessary, so that they might hear the gospel, it is much more likely that they'll remember, yeah, but I may think John's crazy. I may disagree that, I still don't believe, but I at least know he cares about me. Right. And so I think that's the other takeaway from this is like, just remember that we don't need to be unnecessarily offensive. We don't need to be unnecessarily aggressive when it comes to sharing the gospel. We need to be intentional and strategic with how we do it. Yeah.
I feel a book could be in here. Wisdom, evangelism.
Just the Bible. I'm just kidding.
Just the Bible. Yeah. Okay. Next question here is, so are there any challenges that you see that could take place if you were to actually live out what you're saying of like, hey, we should be telling people about Jesus? I mean, what kind of challenges could come up?
Oh, I mean, sure, you might experience some like small discomfort, like, it's awkward when people say, I disagree with you. Like, we don't like disagreement in our society. That's why this is wild, but one of the reasons we have such strong disagreement in our culture today is because none of us like disagreement, and it, like, just an ounce of it is so offensive to us that it pushes us to these extremes often. So we're just really uncomfortable with disagreement. The reality is, and Scripture is clear about this. If you look at any of the apostles and the evangelists in Scripture, like, they all suffered and were persecuted and were tortured and died in horrible ways. And the reality is, when we share the gospel, we will receive pushback from the world. One of the scriptures I referenced talks about how Satan is the god of this world, and he has blinded people to the truth of the gospel. And we have to remember that that's still the world we live in. And you will be mocked. You will be hated. I don't think in the U.S. we're persecuted in the same sense that was, but understand that, like, people will make fun of you, and it really is not fun to have people mock you, especially when you're sharing something for their benefit. And I think it's important for us to just remember that will happen. And I mean, that's why it's important for us to remember that we don't live for the approval and the acceptance of man. We live for the approval of God, because at the end of the day, all of this pales in comparison to the glories of Christ. All of this is temporary, but that is eternal. And so I think we just have to sometimes step out of that mindset of, like, so what if people mock you? So what if you encounter some persecution or suffering today?
Yeah.
What truly matters is that which is eternal. And I get convicted of this too, because it's like someone will say something mean to me online, and I will want to like burn them bad. Like I will just be like, the other day, this is a good example of this. Somebody was ripping on a clip of one of David's sermons.
Yeah.
And the dude didn't use any punctuation, no capitalization. It was really hard to decode what he was trying to say. And my instinct was to like go back at him and be like, I could take your point serious if I could actually read it or something, something wild like that, just to, that isn't helpful. Right. Now the guy had, after I kind of read through, he had some serious questions, and we can talk about those things. But if I had just started off in that conversation by punching back and getting angry, that is such a short-sighted mentality when it comes to sharing our faith and representing Jesus. Like my instinct was to defend the gospel, right, rather than to just proclaim the gospel. And if we step back in situations like that and realize we're playing for a eternal prize, I am not playing to win the argument with you. I am playing to win you over to Jesus, so that you might give your life to Him. And I think we just have to sometimes step back and see things in that eternal light.
And I think that's one area that I struggle with as well. Of like, how do you answer people like that and do it in an effective way? And I think that one of the things that I like is Proverbs has so much wisdom in it, and especially for dealing with difficult people or difficult situations. And the one is like, answer a fool in his folly, and he's going to drag you right there. You're going to become a fool as well. So being able to distinguish, okay, is this a fool in his folly right now? And if you're using some type of argument that is based on something that's not helpful, then you are answering a fool in his folly, and you are becoming the fool is dragging you down to them. You're not helping raise them up. Yeah. So there's sometimes where it's okay to just say, this is a fool in his folly, and I'm not going to partake in this.
And you combine that with I think it was the Romans 12 passage I talked about, and it says like, don't repay evil for evil. Vengeance is the Lord.
This is why the scripture is so full of so much wisdom that we can directly apply to our lives and be like, I should clearly take this path.
What I love about this is too, is like, so, basically what the Proverbs you're talking about is saying, don't engage with the fool, because you'll just be made a fool yourself. Right. And then this passage in Romans says, when you're engaging with people who are mistreating you, actually what you should do is treat them with so much kindness, because at the end of the day, that will actually that's how you get back at them. That's like, they will make them so mad because they're trying to get you to stoop to their level. And just don't go there. It will be so frustrating to them. I had an interaction on Facebook in I was not prepared for this, but it was a thread about using the word welcoming at church. Someone thought it was overused in church communication and welcome home and all that stuff. So I was just saying it, and this guy hopped on, and he wanted to, with me, and this wasn't about the conversation at all. He wanted to have a debate about homosexuality in the church. And he kept trying to bait me to say certain things. And I could tell it was very obvious. And I just kept talking graciously with him. And what was wild was, the more gracious my response to him, the more I was charitable to him and all that, his responses got more and more angry and more hostile. And after that thread, a bunch of other people hopped on and basically were saying, hey dude, you're being a jerk. John's being nice to you. And it kind of clicked for me. It was like, it's not even about dealing with the fool at that point. It's about the people watching you interact with the fool. And people are watching how you engage with others. When you are persecuted, they're watching how you handle it. And that is a witness to those people as well. So it's not just about the one person you're engaging with. It's about everybody watching. In that same Romans 12 passage, it says, it says basically do good in the sight of all. I'm blanking on the wording. But basically what it's saying is those watching can they walk away and say that, no, you were behaving in a good way, in a righteous way? And I don't know. That's just another layer of this whole evangelism conversation.
And I think that there probably is no better time for this message than the season we're about to head into, because everyone is already on guard, and a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about the cycle of just the election cycle, right?
Oh my
the
gosh,
presidential election cycle. So I'm excited for the next sermon series that's coming up, because we did it 4 years ago, and it was excellent at that time. It was a hard one for as a church to deal with, because of David, told us to like actually examine ourselves and our motives behind it. So there was a lot of people who left either in silence or in contemplation of, man, that was challenging, but a good challenging.
I remember there was something just so different about, and like, you got to remember, this was 2020. We had just like gotten back into some sense of regular church, and there was this big contentious election about to happen. And like, it was such a fiery moment in our culture. And I remember when David was like, hey, we're doing the sermon series, being like, I'm a little nervous, because people react and respond, but then realizing that the takeaways were so convicting as Christians, and it wasn't even it. This was the thing. We're talking about politics, kind of, but it's really about the Bible. It's really about this sermon is about following Jesus.
Following Jesus.
And what was amazing about it is just seeing people from different political sides, seeing people with different backgrounds, seeing people who at the time, like, just knowing who was in our church at the time, knowing that there were, if y'all remember COVID, it was like 50-50.
It was really literally
people
50-50.
were like, half the church would leave if we did this, half the church would leave if we did this. Oh, you can't be a Christian if you believe this. You can't, and it was so contentious.
Very polarizing, as politics are.
And everything was super polarizing.
Everything was super polarizing.
Watching everybody leave that sermon series challenged, not as like, it wasn't, hey, if you're a conservative Christian, think this way. If you're a progressive Christian, think this way. It was, if you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, we have to think about these things. And just seeing everybody have that be challenged in that same way, was just amazing to watch. And so I'm super excited to see this happen again. It's not a, things have changed, details have changed, but the underlying things we're talking about are still,
Do you know when it starts?
September 8th.
September 8th. So that's the next Sunday we're all back together because of we're
so
gone.
We won't be here next week.
Right around the corner, essentially.
Yeah. The next sermon you hear is going to be awesome.
Yes. So you don't want to miss it for sure.
No.
Well, thanks for answering some questions about the sermon. Great job on Sunday.
Thank you.
And until we see you all again, have a great day. Thanks.